I'm Hazel Mitchell, 32, Chief of Neurosurgery at Boston's most prestigious hospital. Yet 7 years ago, my father looked me in the eye and said, "You'll never amount to anything worthwhile." My mother nodded in agreement. They both believed my younger brother Michael was destined for greatness while I was just taking up space. For years, I carried those words silently as I worked twice as hard to prove them wrong. Before I tell you how my mother nearly collapsed when she found out who I really was, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Give this video a like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated. Growing up in our middle-class suburban Connecticut home, I learned early that academic achievement was the Mitchell family currency. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Mitchell, weren't subtle about their expectations. Dad was an accountant who'd always dreamed of becoming a doctor but couldn't afford medical school. Mom was a high school English teacher who measured success by the prestige of one's career. "Education is everything," Dad would say at dinner. "It's the difference between being somebody and being nobody." I took those words to heart, bringing home straight A's from elementary school. But somehow, my achievements always seemed to disappear in the shadow of my younger brother Michael's existence. 3 years my junior, Michael was everything I wasn't in my parents' eyes: athletic, charming, socially adept. Where I was quiet and studious, he was outgoing and charismatic. "Look at Michael playing with the neighbor kids," Mom would say. "Why can't you be more social like your brother, Hazel?" When I brought home a perfect math test in 4th grade, Dad glanced at it and said, "That's nice." The same evening, Michael showed a C+ in science that he'd improved from AD, and they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his progress. By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. My straight A's were expected, never celebrated. "This is what you're supposed to do," Mom would say with a dismissive wave. Meanwhile, Michael's B's and occasional A's warranted special dinners and proud phone calls to relatives. The family photo albums told the story just as clearly. There were dozens of photos of Michael's football games, swim meets, and school plays. My academic award ceremonies? Not a single picture. I still remember standing on stage receiving the 8th grade Academic Excellence Award, scanning the audience, and finding no familiar faces. Later, I learned they'd chosen to attend Michael's junior varsity scrimmage instead. It wasn't an important event, Mom explained when I asked why they hadn't come. Besides, Michael needed the support more. The most painful moments were overhearing my parents talking about us to others. To relatives, family, friends, even on phone calls, the narrative was consistent. "Michael's showing real promise," Dad would gush. "Coach says he might get a college scholarship if he keeps developing." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Hazel? Oh, she's fine. Still has her nose in books all the time." The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, Margaret. Mom's mother lived an hour away, and my occasional weekends with her became my sanctuary. "You have a remarkable mind, Hazel," she told me when I was 12, after I explained a science project that had earned me the top grade in class, but only a cursory nod from my parents. Don't ever let anyone make you believe that's not valuable. Grandma Margaret had been a nurse in the 1960s, back when women in medicine were rare and often dismissed. She had stories about doctors ignoring her observations, only to discover later she'd been right. Perhaps that's why she recognized the same dismissal happening to me. When I was 15, Grandma Margaret was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The doctors initially missed it, dismissing her symptoms as elderly confusion until it was too late for effective treatment. I spent every possible moment by her hospital bed during those final months. "Promise me something," she said during one of her more lucid days, holding my hand with surprising strength. "Promise you'll become whatever you want to be, not what anyone else thinks you should be." I promised, and 2 weeks later, she was gone. At her funeral, while my parents consoled each other and fussed over Michael's proper behavior, I made a silent vow. I would become a doctor, specifically a neurosurgeon. I would make sure other people wouldn't lose their loved ones to missed diagnoses and dismissive attitudes. I didn't share this plan with my parents. By then, I'd learned to keep my ambitions to myself. Instead, I channeled my grief into studying even harder, securing perfect SAT scores, and completing advanced placement classes. When I graduated as valedictorian of my high school, I delivered a speech about perseverance and following dreams even when they seem impossible. From the podium, I could see my parents in the audience, Mom checking her watch and Dad scrolling through his phone. They were waiting for the ceremony to end so they could take photos of Michael in his football jersey. He'd been selected for an all-state summer training camp, and that was apparently the real celebration of the day. At the small family gathering afterward, my father raised a toast to Michael and his bright future in college athletics, and to Hazel for finishing high school. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, acceptance letters from 7 prestigious universities spread before me, including a full scholarship to Johns Hopkins that I hadn't told anyone about. I made my decision then. I would take the scholarship and finally step out of the shadow of my family's low expectations. The day I left for Johns Hopkins was both terrifying and exhilarating. Mom helped me pack with the same efficiency she applied to household chores, while Dad lectured me about being practical with my education. Liberal arts might be more suitable for you, he suggested, despite my clear interest in pre-med courses. Not everyone is cut out for the sciences. What they didn't know was that I'd already mapped out my entire academic path, pre-med with a focus on neuroscience, then medical school, then specialization in neurosurgery. I kept this to myself, nodding along to their limited expectations while privately clutching my scholarship letter like a talisman. The contrast with Michael's college send-off 3 weeks later was stark. For him, they threw a backyard party, invited extended family, and Dad gave a tearful speech about his son following his athletic dreams at State University. For me, there had been a quick hug at the airport and Mom's parting words. Try not to get overwhelmed. My first semester at Johns Hopkins was a revelation. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence and academic achievement. My professors didn't compare me unfavorably to anyone else. They evaluated me on my own merits. For perhaps the first time in my life, my natural abilities were seen as assets rather than inconvenient personality traits. Ms. Mitchell, your analysis of these neural pathways is quite sophisticated, Professor Diana Winters told me after reviewing my first major assignment. Have you considered research as part of your medical career? I nearly cried at the simple acknowledgement of my abilities. Professor Winters soon became more than just an instructor. She became the mentor I'd never had. A renowned neurologist herself, she recognized my potential and began inviting me to observe her research, introducing me to colleagues, and recommending additional readings. You have a natural gift for this field, she told me one evening as we discussed a complicated case study. The way you integrate information and see connections others miss, it's rare. Meanwhile, I was making real friends for the first time. My roommate Audrey Coleman was studying biochemistry and shared my intense work ethic. We often studied until dawn, challenging each other and celebrating our successes. With her and our small circle of friends, I discovered what it felt like to be valued for exactly who I was. My visits home became increasingly rare and tense. During freshman year Thanksgiving break, I made the mistake of excitedly sharing that I'd received the highest grade in organic chemistry, a notoriously difficult course. That's nice, dear Mom said, barely looking up from preparing the turkey. Did you hear Michael made starting lineup as a freshman? The coach says he hasn't seen that kind of natural talent in years. By Christmas, I'd learned to keep my achievements to myself. I sat through dinner after dinner listening to detailed accounts of Michael's games, his social life, his popularity with teammates. When relatives asked about my studies, Dad would quickly interject. Oh, Hazel's still figuring things out. Not everyone finds their path right away like Michael. The summer after freshman year was my last extended stay at home. I'd arranged a research assistantship with Professor Winters, but it didn't start until July. Those 3 weeks in June became an exercise in invisibility. "Why can't you be more like Michael?" Mom asked one evening after I declined to attend a neighbor's barbecue, preferring to read research papers instead. "He makes an effort to be sociable." "Michael has time for that," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "I'm preparing for medical school." Dad scoffed. "Medical school? Be realistic, Hazel. Those spots go to exceptional students." I bit my tongue instead of pointing out my perfect GPA. What was the use? In their eyes, I would always be the unremarkable daughter, regardless of evidence to the contrary. That fall, I returned to campus with relief and threw myself even deeper into my studies. I took extra courses, volunteered at the university hospital, and began publishing research papers under Professor Winters' guidance. As my resume grew, my contact with family diminished. The financial reality of my situation became clear when my parents informed me they wouldn't be contributing to any expenses beyond what my scholarship didn't cover. "Michael's athletic scholarship only covers tuition," Mom explained over the phone. "We need to help with his housing and expenses. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. I took on part-time jobs at the campus library and as a teaching assistant, often working 20 hours a week while maintaining my course load. Some nights I survived on vending machine coffee and 2 hours of sleep, but I never let my grades slip. Not once. By senior year, I had been accepted to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine with another substantial scholarship. When I called home with the news, Mom sounded distracted. "That's nice, honey. Did you get the photos I sent of Michael's championship game?" I stopped calling with updates after that. My white coat ceremony at the beginning of medical school should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. It's a significant milestone, the formal induction into the medical profession, where students receive their first white coats and recite the Hippocratic Oath. Families typically attend, beaming with pride. I sent my parents an invitation with details 6 weeks in advance. 2 days before the ceremony, I called to confirm they were coming. "Oh, Hazel, I'm so sorry," Mom said, not sounding particularly sorry at all. "Michael has a big game that weekend. You know how important these scouting opportunities are for his future." I stood in that auditorium, watching my classmates surrounded by proud parents, siblings, and extended family, while I remained alone. Professor Winters attended in their stead, giving me a fierce hug and whispering, "They have no idea what they're missing." That was the final breaking point. I decided then that I would no longer seek my parents' approval or recognition. I would build my life and career without the emotional drain of their indifference. I threw myself into medical school with an intensity that even my hardworking peers noticed. While they occasionally took weekends off or holidays to visit family, I remained in the library, the lab, or volunteered for extra hospital shifts. My singular focus became excellence in medicine, particularly neurosurgery. Around the end of my first year of medical school, I received a strange call from my mother's cousin Evelyn. "Hazel, I was so sorry to hear you dropped out of school. Your mother tells me you're working at a coffee shop now? Such a shame after all that promise." I was stunned into momentary silence. "Aunt Evelyn, I'm in medical school at Johns Hopkins. I haven't dropped out of anything." Her confusion was palpable. "But your mother told everyone at the family reunion last month that you couldn't handle the pressure of university and had to leave." As the conversation continued, a sickening realization dawned. While I'd been distancing myself from family contact, an entirely different narrative about my life had been constructed without my knowledge. Through careful questioning of distant relatives and old family friends over the following weeks, I pieced together the story my parents had been telling everyone. Hazel, the disappointing daughter, had dropped out of college due to emotional problems and was now working menial jobs while Michael continued to be the family success story. The truth about Michael, which I discovered through a mutual childhood friend, was quite different. He had lost his athletic scholarship after a mediocre performance freshman year, coupled with failing grades. He had dropped out after his sophomore year and was bouncing between unsuccessful business ventures, all funded by my parents. I was hurt but not entirely surprised to learn that the money my parents had originally promised for my education had been redirected to bail out Michael's failed attempts at starting a sports marketing company, then a fitness center, then a protein shake business. Most painfully, I discovered through social media posts that Michael had begun implying to his friends that he was pre-med, using vague references to medical studies and even posting photos of textbooks similar to mine. My achievements had become his fiction. I considered confrontation. I drafted multiple emails and letters, even rehearsed phone calls. But ultimately, I decided that engaging would only drain energy I needed for my studies. If they needed to create this fictional version of our lives where he was the successful one and I was the failure, so be it. I would know the truth, and eventually, so would the world. I severed what little remained of our communication. I blocked their numbers, returned mail unopened, and asked the few family members I still trusted not to share information about me. It was like performing emotional surgery, painful but necessary for healing. My medical school years passed in a blur of 16-hour days, complex neuroanatomy, surgical rotations, and research publications. I graduated at the top of my class with multiple residency offers from the most prestigious programs in the country. When I walked across the stage to receive my medical degree, Professor Winters and Audrey cheered loudly enough to make up for my absent family. Dr. Hazel Mitchell, the dean, announced, and in that moment, I felt both the weight and freedom of becoming exactly who I'd promised my grandmother I would be. I chose Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston for my residency, partly for its exceptional neurosurgery program and partly for the distance it provided from my family in Connecticut. The 7-year neurosurgery residency is notoriously grueling, even among medical specialties known for their intensity. The first year as an intern nearly broke me. 100-hour work weeks, being on call every third night, snatching sleep in short bursts on hospital cots, and facing the emotional weight of life and death situations daily pushed me to my limits. Some of my fellow residents quit, unable to withstand the pressure. But I had spent my entire life being underestimated and dismissed. This pressure felt familiar, almost comforting in its clarity. At least here, my performance was judged on measurable criteria: surgical skill, medical knowledge, patient outcomes, rather than how I compared to someone else. Mitchell, explain the approach you'd take for this glioblastoma, Dr. Harrison, the intimidating chief of neurosurgery, demanded during my second year, pointing to an MRI scan during rounds. I detailed the procedure step by step, including potential complications and how I'd address them. When I finished, the room was silent. Dr. Harrison, known for his biting criticism, simply nodded. That's precisely right. Who taught you that approach? It's not in the standard literature. I developed it based on a combination of techniques from recent journal articles, I answered truthfully. He raised an eyebrow. Interesting. I want to see you perform it. That case became the first of many where I began innovating surgical techniques. By my 4th year of residency, I had developed a method for accessing certain previously inoperable brain tumors that significantly reduced patient risk. When my research was published in the Journal of Neurosurgery, I received recognition from the wider medical community. Meanwhile, through the grapevine of distant relatives and old acquaintances, I occasionally heard updates about my family. The fictional narrative about me had evolved. Now I had apparently tried medical school but couldn't handle it and was working as a pharmacy technician somewhere in the Midwest. Michael, conversely, was supposedly thriving in medical studies. The most surreal moment came when a new resident joined our program from my hometown area. During an orientation dinner, he mentioned knowing my brother. Michael Mitchell, right? He's always talking about med school and his research. Says his sister couldn't hack it and dropped out. Tough family to live up to, I guess. I nearly choked on my water but managed to maintain my composure. Is that so? And what school does Michael attend? The resident looked confused. You know, he never specifically says. Just talks about his patients and his research. I assume Johns Hopkins based on the gear he wears. I simply nodded and changed the subject, but later that night, I searched social media and found recent photos of Michael wearing a Johns Hopkins medicine sweatshirt and stethoscope in what appeared to be staged doctor photos. He was using my accomplishments to create an entirely fictional medical career for himself, while my parents continued spreading the lie that I was the failure. I could have exposed him. A single phone call to the right people would have unraveled the entire fabrication. But something held me back, perhaps the last remnant of family loyalty, or simply the knowledge that my actual work was more important than correcting public perception. Instead, I channeled my frustration into my work. My innovative surgical technique continued to evolve, and I published several more papers. By my 6th year of residency, I was being invited to present at international conferences and had started training other surgeons in my methods. Dr. Harrison, once my intimidating superior, now consulted me on difficult cases. Mitchell has the best hands I've seen in 30 years of neurosurgery, I overheard him telling a colleague. And her spatial reasoning is off the charts. When I completed my residency, Massachusetts General created a special attending physician position specifically for me, unusual for someone so early in their career. 2 years later, at 32, I was nominated for the position of Chief of Neurosurgery after Dr. Harrison announced his early retirement. I'm recommending you as my replacement, he told me matter-of-factly. The committee will consider other candidates, of course, but they'd be fools not to select you. The appointment was historic. I became the youngest chief of neurosurgery in the hospital's history and one of the few women to hold the position at a major medical center. The announcement made medical news, with profiles in several journals and even a mention in the Boston Globe. Throughout all this success, I maintained my privacy about my estrangement from my family. Colleagues knew I didn't go home for holidays or take time off for family events, but I deflected personal questions with vague references to a complicated relationship. Even my closest friends at the hospital didn't know the full story of how thoroughly my family had erased my actual achievements and replaced them with a fictional narrative of failure. Then came the call that would change everything. Dr. Mitchell, this is your cousin Thomas. I'm sorry to bother you at work, but Michael's been admitted to Boston Memorial with severe abdominal pain. They're saying it's appendicitis with complications, and he needs to be transferred to a better-equipped hospital. I gripped the phone tightly. Is it serious? Serious enough that they're recommending transfer to Mass General, your hospital. I thought you should know since your parents are driving up from Connecticut now. They don't know you work there. For a moment, I considered recusing myself, ensuring Michael would be treated by other physicians while I remained invisible. But after 7 years of separation and lies, perhaps it was finally time for the truth. Thank you for letting me know, Thomas. I'll make sure he receives excellent care. I hung up, my heart pounding as I realized that my carefully separated worlds were about to collide. The day I was officially appointed Chief of Neurosurgery should have been the pinnacle moment of pride in my career. The ceremony was attended by hospital board members, distinguished physicians, and even the mayor of Boston. As I accepted the position, becoming the youngest department chief in the hospital's 200-year history, the applause was thunderous. Dr. Mitchell represents the future of medicine, the hospital director announced. Her innovative surgical techniques have already saved hundreds of lives previously considered beyond help. Afterward, there was a reception where colleagues congratulated me and medical journal reporters requested interviews. Throughout it all, I maintained the polite smile and humble demeanor expected of me, while inside I couldn't help wondering what my parents would think if they could see me now. The irony wasn't lost on me that on the same day I reached this career milestone, my estranged brother was being admitted to Boston Memorial Hospital with what was initially diagnosed as appendicitis. According to my cousin Thomas, complications had developed and Michael would need to be transferred to a facility with more advanced care. I knew the protocol. Mass General, as the premier medical center in the region, would be the natural choice for transfer. As chief of neurosurgery, I wouldn't typically be involved in an appendicitis case, but I found myself checking the incoming transfer list throughout the day. Dr. Mitchell? My assistant looked concerned as she entered my office. I thought you should know there's a patient being transferred from Boston Memorial with your same last name. Michael Mitchell? Any relation? I took a deep breath. Yes, he's my brother. Her eyebrows raised slightly. I'd never mentioned having a brother in the 5 years she'd worked with me. Oh! Well, he's being admitted under Dr. Sanderson in general surgery. Apparently, there are some complications with his appendicitis that might involve infection spreading to other organs. Thank you for letting me know, I said, trying to sound casual. Please don't mention our relationship to anyone. I'd prefer to keep my personal and professional lives separate. As the day progressed, I found myself facing an ethical dilemma. Should I involve myself in Michael's case? Check his chart? Visit him? The professional part of me said to maintain distance. Doctors typically don't treat family members due to emotional complications. But another part, perhaps the part still hurting from years of lies and dismissal, wanted to see this confrontation through. I decided on a middle path. I wouldn't directly involve myself in his treatment, but I would monitor his case from a distance, ensuring he received the best care possible. Not because he deserved it after years of taking credit for my accomplishments, but because that's what a good doctor would do. Later that afternoon, my assistant informed me that Michael had arrived and was being settled in room 412. She also mentioned that 2 people identifying themselves as his parents were with him. My parents, just a few floors away after 7 years of separation. I understand Mr. Mitchell is telling the nursing staff he's a medical student here, she added with confusion. But we don't have any record of him in our program. Of course he was. Even lying in a hospital bed, Michael couldn't resist continuing his charade. I pulled up his medical records on my computer, a technical breach of protocol since he wasn't my patient, but as department chief, I had access to all patient files. The diagnosis was concerning: perforated appendix with signs of peritonitis and potential sepsis developing. He would need immediate surgery and aggressive antibiotic treatment. As I scrolled through his intake forms, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Under allergies, there was no mention of his severe cephalosporin allergy, a potentially fatal reaction to a common class of antibiotics that would likely be used for his infection. I immediately called Dr. Sanderson. Jim, it's Hazel. I need to tell you something about your new transfer, Michael Mitchell. The medical student with appendicitis? What about him? I paused, choosing my words carefully. First, he's not a medical student here or anywhere else. Second, and more importantly, he has a severe allergy to cephalosporins that's not in his chart. He developed it as a teenager. Anaphylaxis with hives and throat swelling. There was a moment of silence. How do you know this, Hazel? He's my brother. Another pause. I didn't know you had a brother. There's a lot about my family I don't discuss, I said simply. Please make sure his allergy is noted prominently in his chart. I'd appreciate if you kept our relationship confidential for now. After hanging up, I sat at my desk, turning over the possibilities in my mind. My parents and brother were in the same building as me for the first time in 7 years. They still had no idea about my actual position or achievements. Part of me wanted to maintain that separation, to continue letting them believe whatever fictional version of my life they had constructed. But another part, perhaps the stronger part, was tired of hiding. Tired of allowing them to diminish me even in my absence. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Promise you'll become whatever you want to be, not what anyone else thinks you should be. I had kept that promise to her. Perhaps it was time to reveal that truth. As I deliberated, my office phone rang again. It was Rebecca Santos, the head nurse on the surgical floor. Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry to bother you, but there's a situation with the patient in 412. His father is being quite difficult with the staff, demanding to speak to the real doctors and not the residents. He's also insisting his son knows more about proper medical care than our nurses because he's almost a doctor himself. Dr. Sanderson is in surgery, and I thought you might want to intervene before this escalates. It seemed the decision had been made for me. I'll be right there, Rebecca. I straightened my white coat with the embroidered Hazel Mitchell, MD, Chief of Neurosurgery, and my hospital ID badge. 7 years of silence was about to end. As I approached room 412, I could hear my father's voice through the partially open door, the familiar authoritative tone that had dominated my childhood. My son is practically a doctor himself, he was saying loudly. He's in advanced medical training at Johns Hopkins. The same program where our daughter failed, ironically enough. Some people just aren't cut out for the pressure. I paused outside the door, my heart pounding. Through the narrow opening, I could see my mother sitting beside Michael's bed, adjusting his pillows with the same doting attention she'd always shown him. Michael himself looked pale and drawn with pain, but was apparently still committed to the charade. The problem with hospitals like Boston Memorial is they don't recognize sepsis early enough, he was explaining weakly to a nurse who was checking his IV. At Johns Hopkins, where I study, we have advanced protocols for. Actually, early sepsis recognition rates at Boston Memorial have improved by 40% in the past 2 years, the nurse interrupted politely. And this is Massachusetts General Hospital, not Boston Memorial. You were transferred. I took a deep breath and walked in. The nurse recognized me immediately and straightened up. Dr. Mitchell. I was just explaining to the patient about his antibiotic regimen. My mother glanced up briefly, then back at Michael, not registering who had entered. My father turned with an impatient expression that froze when his eyes met mine. Michael stared in shock, his mouth slightly open. Thank you, Kelly, I said to the nurse. I'll take it from here. Of course, doctor, she replied, stepping aside deferentially. My father recovered first. Hazel? What are you doing here? Are you working here? I maintained my professional demeanor. I'm Dr. Mitchell, yes. I understand there's some confusion about the patient's care. My mother finally looked at me properly, her eyes widening as she took in my white coat and the stethoscope around my neck. You're a nurse here? Before I could answer, Rebecca Santos, the head nurse I'd spoken with earlier, entered the room carrying Michael's updated chart. She looked between me and my family, clearly sensing the tension. Dr. Mitchell, I've updated the patient's chart with the allergy information you provided. Dr. Sanderson wanted to confirm you'll be available to consult if needed, given your familiarity with the case. Then came the moment that would change everything. Rebecca, looking at my mother who still appeared confused, added helpfully, Are you just meeting Dr. Mitchell? She's our chief of neurosurgery, youngest in the hospital's history. The medical journal did that big feature on her pioneering surgical technique last month. Everyone's been talking about it. The room went completely silent. My mother's face drained of color, and she reached for the edge of Michael's bed to steady herself. My father's expression cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been shame. Are you the chief doctor everyone's talking about? Rebecca continued, oblivious to the family drama unfolding. The one who developed the Mitchell approach for inoperable brain tumors? My mother swayed slightly, looking as though she might actually faint. My father moved to support her, his face ashen. That's not possible, he muttered, though there was no conviction in his voice. Hazel couldn't even handle medical school. She dropped out years ago. Michael, to his credit, looked mortified. Dad, he said quietly, I think we need to stop. Rebecca looked confused. I'm sorry, there must be some misunderstanding. Dr. Mitchell completed her medical degree at Johns Hopkins with highest honors before her residency here. She's published 12 major research papers and performed over 500 successful brain surgeries using her innovative technique. The Mitchell approach is being taught in medical schools worldwide. My father was still shaking his head in denial. No. You must have her confused with someone else. Our daughter works at a pharmacy in Ohio. Michael is the doctor in the family. He's at Johns Hopkins doing research on. Dad, Michael interrupted more firmly. Stop. Please. I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm and professional despite the emotional turmoil inside. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is a shock. However, right now my concern is for my patient's well-being. Michael has a serious condition requiring immediate attention. My mother found her voice at last. You're actually a doctor? A brain surgeon? Chief of neurosurgery, I corrected gently. And yes, I completed medical school 7 years ago, followed by my residency here. I never dropped out of anything. My father's face had turned from pale to red. But Michael told us. He said you'd failed out of pre-med and were too embarrassed to tell us. I looked at my brother, who couldn't meet my eyes. Did he? The room fell into uncomfortable silence again, broken only by the beeping of Michael's monitors. Rebecca, finally sensing the personal nature of the conversation, excused herself tactfully. I'll let you have some privacy. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Sanderson will be out of surgery in 20 minutes to discuss the case. Once she left, my mother began to cry softly. I don't understand. All this time, we thought. You thought what you wanted to think, I said, more sharply than I intended. You believed Michael because it fit the narrative you'd already created, that he was the successful one and I was the disappointment. Michael shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed. Hazel, I'm sorry. It just started as a small lie and then spiraled. Mom and Dad were so disappointed when I lost my scholarship, and then when I dropped out entirely, it was easier to let them think you had failed instead. My father was still struggling to process the revelation. But we never heard from you. Never saw your name anywhere. How were we supposed to know? You could have asked me, I replied simply. You could have called Johns Hopkins instead of just believing what you were told. You could have shown even a fraction of the interest in my career that you showed in Michael's fictional one. A look of realization crossed my mother's face. The Mitchell approach, that medical breakthrough we read about last year. That was you. I nodded. But the article said Dr. Mitchell was one of the most promising neurosurgeons in the country, my father said, still sounding disbelieving. Yes, I confirmed. That would be me. Michael winced. Whether from physical pain or emotional discomfort wasn't clear. Hazel, I used some of your actual achievements in my stories. I told them about the surgical technique, but I said I was developing it. I looked at him with more pity than anger. I know. I've heard bits and pieces over the years about your supposed medical career. Quite impressive for someone who never attended a single day of medical school. My father tried a different approach. Why didn't you tell us about your success? We're your parents. We had a right to know. A right? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You lost any right to know about my life when you dismissed every achievement I ever had. When you missed my white coat ceremony to attend Michael's game. When you told the entire family I had dropped out when I was actually at the top of my class. My mother was openly sobbing now. We didn't know. How could we have known? You could have asked, I repeated, or shown up, or called, or done any of the things parents typically do. The tension was interrupted by Michael's monitors beeping more rapidly. His face had grown paler, and he was sweating profusely. My doctor instincts immediately took over, personal feelings set aside. I stepped to his bedside, checking his pulse and the monitors. Michael, how's your pain? Scale of 1 to 10? 8. Maybe 9, he gasped. It's spreading across my abdomen. I pressed the call button. His peritonitis is worsening. He needs surgery immediately. When the nursing team rushed in, I switched fully to physician mode, relaying Michael's status and necessary preparations. Dr. Sanderson arrived moments later and, after a quick assessment, agreed with my evaluation. He needs to go to the OR now, Dr. Sanderson confirmed. The infection is spreading faster than we anticipated. My parents watched this exchange in stunned silence, seeing me in my element for the first time, confident, authoritative, respected by the medical team around me. As they prepared to wheel Michael to surgery, he grabbed my hand. Hazel, I'm sorry. For everything. I've been living in your shadow, pretending to be you, because I couldn't face being myself. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. We'll talk after your surgery. Focus on getting better now. My parents started to follow as Michael was wheeled out, but I stopped them. The surgery will take at least 2 hours. You should wait in the family room. Will he be okay? My mother asked tearfully. I considered sugarcoating it, but honesty seemed important now. The infection is serious, but he's young and otherwise healthy. Dr. Sanderson is excellent. My father looked at me with new eyes, as though seeing me for the first time. Will you be involved in his surgery? I hesitated. Typically, surgeons didn't operate on family members due to emotional complications. But this was an exceptional situation, and I was uniquely qualified to assist if complications arose. I'll consult if needed, I finally said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to review his case with the surgical team. As I walked away, I heard my father say to my mother in a shocked whisper, "Our daughter is a brain surgeon, chief of neurosurgery." How did we not know? How indeed, I thought, as I headed toward the OR to ensure my brother received the care he needed, despite everything that had happened between us. Michael's surgery lasted nearly 4 hours. What had begun as a relatively straightforward appendectomy became complicated when the surgical team discovered the infection had spread more extensively than initially thought. I waited with my parents in the family room for the first hour, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words and emotions. I need to check on some patients, I finally said, standing to leave. It wasn't entirely untrue. I did have responsibilities, but it was also an escape from the suffocating tension. Hazel, my father said as I reached the door. I don't understand how all this happened. I turned back. All what, Dad? My becoming a doctor despite your low expectations, or your believing for 7 years that I was a failure. He had no answer for that. I spent the next 3 hours reviewing files in my office, occasionally checking on Michael's surgery progress. When Dr. Sanderson called to report a complication, unexpected bleeding that was difficult to control, I made the decision to join the operation. Not as a sister, but as the chief of neurosurgery whose expertise might be needed. In the OR, I maintained complete professionalism, assisting with the complex case without any hint of our personal connection. When the bleeding was finally controlled and Michael was stabilized, Dr. Sanderson looked at me with newfound respect. Your brother is lucky to have you, Dr. Mitchell. Not many patients get the hospital chief in their operating room. I nodded, removing my surgical gloves. Please let his parents know the surgery was successful but complicated. He'll need to stay in the ICU overnight. Michael remained sedated through the night. I checked on him between my scheduled surgeries the next day, mostly when my parents were taking breaks from their bedside vigil. By evening, he was awake and stable enough to be moved to a regular room. I waited until visiting hours were over to have our first real conversation. He looked small in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors still attached, a far cry from the confident person who had been impersonating a doctor just days before. How are you feeling? I asked, checking his chart at the foot of his bed. Like someone ripped out my appendix and then some, he attempted to joke, then grew serious. Hazel, I don't even know where to begin. I sat in the chair beside his bed. Neither do I, Michael. 7 years is a long time. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since we were children. You're actually a brain surgeon. Chief of neurosurgery. I've been pretending to be what you actually are. Why? I asked simply. Why create such an elaborate lie? Why use my life as your fiction? He was quiet for a moment. When I lost my scholarship, Dad was so disappointed. You know how he always wanted to be a doctor himself. Then when I dropped out entirely, I couldn't face it. One day, I mentioned something about medical research I'd read, and they just assumed I was considering med school. It snowballed from there. And telling them I had failed instead? Michael had the decency to look ashamed. That was the worst part. When they started asking why they never heard about your college graduation, I panicked and said you'd dropped out. It was easier than explaining why we weren't in touch. And once that lie was out there, I couldn't take it back. You could have, I countered. At any point in 7 years, you could have told the truth. I know, he admitted. But then I'd have to face being the family disappointment. You don't know what that's like. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, bitter sound. I don't know what that's like? Michael, I spent my entire childhood being compared unfavorably to you. Nothing I accomplished was ever good enough because it wasn't what you did. I was the family disappointment long before you took my achievements and claimed them as your own. His eyes filled with tears. You're right. I never saw it that way as a kid, but looking back, they always did treat us differently. I'm sorry, Hazel. I really am. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough for 7 years of lies, but it was a start. What will you do now? I asked. Now that the truth is out. I don't know, he admitted. Go back to Connecticut, figure out what I actually want to do with my life instead of living a fantasy version of yours. We talked for another hour. About his actual failed business ventures, about my medical school experiences, about the distance that had grown between us. It wasn't a miraculous reconciliation, but it was honest in a way our relationship had never been before. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early to find my parents already in Michael's room. They fell silent when I entered, my father looking uncomfortable and my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Hazel, my mother began hesitantly. We've been talking with Michael about everything. I remained standing near the door, arms crossed. And? My father cleared his throat. We owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. For what specifically? I asked, not making this easy for them. For dismissing every achievement I ever had? For missing my white coat ceremony? For believing I was a failure without ever bothering to check? For all of it, my mother said softly. We had no idea. Because you never asked, I finished for her. You never called. You never visited. You created a narrative about me that fit what you already believed, and you never questioned it. My father stood up straighter. Now wait a minute. You cut us off too. You could have told us about your success. Would you have believed me? I challenged. Or would you have thought I was lying to compete with Michael's fictional medical career? He had no answer for that. The truth is, I continued, I stopped telling you about my achievements long before I stopped communicating entirely. Every time I shared a success, it was dismissed or forgotten in favor of whatever Michael was doing. So eventually, I stopped sharing. My mother was crying again. We never meant to make you feel that way. Intentions don't change impact, I replied, a phrase I'd learned in a hospital management course that seemed particularly apt now. You may not have meant to hurt me, but you did. Repeatedly and consistently, for years. Michael spoke up from his bed. They know, Hazel. We've been talking all morning. I've been telling them how wrong we all were. I looked at each of them in turn, my brother in the hospital bed, my father standing awkwardly by the window, my mother clutching her tissue. This was my family, flawed and human, and finally facing reality. I don't know what happens from here, I said honestly. I've built a life without you in it. A successful, fulfilling life. Could we be part of it now? My mother asked tentatively. Now that we know who you really are? I considered this. That depends. Can you accept who I really am? Not the daughter you wanted me to be, but the person I actually am. We're proud of you, Hazel, my father said, his voice rough with emotion. We should have been proud all along. It wasn't enough, not yet. But it was a beginning. Over the next few days, as Michael recovered enough for discharge, we had more conversations, painful, honest ones where years of resentment and misunderstanding were finally addressed. There were no magical solutions or instant healing, but there was truth where there had been lies and acknowledgement where there had been dismissal. I set clear boundaries for any future relationship. I wouldn't be coming home for every holiday or calling weekly as if nothing had happened. Trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. I'd like to come see where you work, my father said the day Michael was discharged. See this Mitchell approach in action, if that's possible. It's not a spectator sport, Dad, I replied with a small smile. But I could show you my research lab sometime. As they prepared to leave, Michael pulled me aside. I've been thinking about what to do next. Maybe something in hospital administration? Not pretending to be a doctor, but actually helping in healthcare somehow. That could be good, I agreed. But figure out what you want first, not what you think others want from you. My mother hugged me goodbye, holding on a bit too long. I'm so sorry we missed everything, Hazel. Your graduation, your white coat ceremony, your accomplishments. You didn't miss everything, I told her. Just the past. The future is still unwritten. After they left, I returned to my office, processing the emotional whirlwind of the past week. On my desk was a framed photo of my grandmother Margaret, the only family member who had truly seen me. I kept my promise, I whispered to her image. The next day, I returned to my regular schedule, morning rounds, 2 complicated surgeries, a research meeting, and administrative duties. But something had shifted inside me. The weight of being unseen, unacknowledged by my family, had lifted. Not because I'd finally received their approval, but because I'd finally accepted that I hadn't needed it all along. A month later, I established the Margaret Wilson Scholarship for underestimated students pursuing neuroscience, named for my grandmother who had believed in me when no one else did. The first recipient was a brilliant young woman whose family had similarly dismissed her ambitions. My relationship with my family continued to evolve slowly. Michael enrolled in a healthcare management program, finally pursuing his own path rather than a fictional version of mine. My parents made awkward but genuine efforts to understand my work and my life. During a rare dinner together 6 months after our hospital reunion, my mother asked, "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive us, Hazel?" I considered this carefully before answering. I think forgiveness isn't a destination but a process. I'm not doing this to prove you wrong anymore. I'm doing it because it's who I always was, whether you saw it or not. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. The validation I'd sought for so long had always been within me, in the lives I saved, the research I advanced, and the promise I kept to the one person who had truly believed in me from the beginning. Have you ever been underestimated by family or friends, only to prove them wrong through your accomplishments? Share your story in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and triumph. Don't forget to hit that share button if you know someone who needs to hear this message of perseverance and self-belief. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the last to recognize your true potential.